Hello, my name is Alex Smith. I go to Shaftesbury School. I'm a Year 12 student during the coronavirus, and I study history at A level, and this is for my project on the Russian Civil War. This is going to be a timeline, basically, and also me talking about the events, talking through them, and explaining my point of view on them. Also, I have notes on them, which is why I'm going to be looking away because the notes are on my computer screen. I'm recording this on my phone. So, let's get into it. First of all, the start was really when the Russians took power, and this happened November the 7th, 1917, where the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin stormed the Winter Palace and they declare victory. So this is the start where the Tsar is completely thrown out of power, thrown out of his palace, and so is the provisional government. The members of the provisional government that were in the palace at the time are thrown out, and this is when the Bolsheviks take power. Also, from November the 6th, they also take key parts of the city in St. Petersburg. For example, they take post offices, radio stations, and newspaper printers, which means that they can now effectively print propaganda in the capital and further increase their hold on Russia, as they can control the media and what gets published and what doesn't. So they can control everything and what people see and read and hear, which is how they get a lot of support in the cities. Then, however, they hold the January elections on January the 19th, 1918, not too long after. And actually, the Bolsheviks do not gain a majority. However, they do gain a majority of votes in the urban areas, with about 40 to 50% spread with all the major cities. And this puts them in a strong place in the urban areas, but in terms of the rural areas, they only gain about 20% of the votes, which is quite poor. But then again, the peasants didn't know too much about the Bolsheviks, what they've done, and a lot of the support from the cities came from the fact that they shut down the Kornilov affair, and the peasants didn't know much about that, so it was harder for them to support it. So even though the Bolsheviks got outvoted, which the only reason they did is because of the peasants and the amount of peasants that actually are and were, they ended up sending troops in to the Constituent Assembly and forcing out all of the other political parties. Therefore, the Bolsheviks had power and were in control, regardless of the outcome of the vote. Then, on February the 9th, 1918, Russia and Germany signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Now, this is a crucial part. This takes Russia out of the First World War, which means troops are freed up and the Russian economy can maybe start to recover. And also, it's part of what Lenin proposed with his peace, bread and land proposition. So this is the first point where we can see that Russia gets taken out of Civil War. Russia gets taken out of World War One. I mean, this isn't the most popular decision. A lot of people wanted it. However, there were still a substantial number of people that didn't want to be part of the World War because they thought it was embarrassment for Russia, and the terms were incredibly harsh, which did not go well in the Bolsheviks' favor in the view of the public, because the treaty was really harsh and they did have to give up some really important land for them. And in fact, I think they lost about 60-70% of the coal production areas, which was massive in an industry that was just starting to grow, and they were just starting to develop in Russia, and it was a very important industry, especially at the time. Then, in March of 1918, the German forces marched through parts of Russia, and they're virtually unopposed. This is because of political turmoil and, of course, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which kind of allows them to, but they overstepped a little bit. But so in response, the Bolsheviks changed the state capital from Petrograd to Moscow, which is further away from the Germans, which means if the Germans kept on advancing, they had a good chance to regroup in Moscow, hold it, and then push them back. And also, if St. Petersburg had been taken, they had the chance to keep. One sec, having a brain out. So, if the troops had gone to St. Petersburg, they still could publish stuff and keep people informed, and also they could have effectively ran the government because, of course, the Germans wouldn't have been anywhere near the parliament. So that was a smart move from Bolshevik point of view. Then, in the 26th of March, Leon Trotsky is appointed the chief of war, or the war commissar, and therefore what he does is, as soon as he gets control, he increases the size and the effectiveness of the Red Army. This means the Red Army becomes much more powerful, and it is getting ready for the Russian Civil War that is about to take place. At this point, the Red Army is quite strong and is ready for a fight against the Whites. As we can see, the first fight occurs on April the 10th and April the 13th. So it lasts 3 days, and it's called the Battle of, if I butcher this, I apologize. My pronunciation of Russian city names is not incredible. Yekaterinodar, something like that. And this is the first major battle between the Red and the White Army. Now this is a win for the Red Army. The White leader, the commander of the White Army at the time, was killed in the battle, and this would prove quite badly for the Whites, just due to the fact that because they lost this leader, they now struggled, because of course the White Army is made out of a lot of different factions. They now struggled to find who the new leader would be, and this lack of organisation after this leader was killed was definitely one of the main reasons, in my opinion, for the Red Army's complete victory of the Russian Civil War. Now, on July the 4th to the 10th, the Bolshevik Congress of Soviets meet again, so they go back into session, and again, all other parties aren't there, just the Bolsheviks, and they adopt a Soviet constitution, so a Bolshevik constitution. This is basically the point where the Bolsheviks are officially running the country. Then on July the 16th, after being in captivity from about November by the Red Army, the Tsar Nicholas II and all of his family are all murdered at night. This was by the Red Army, or the Cheka. It was a smart move because it meant that monarchists no longer had much to fight for, as they had no one to support, so they had no monarch that could go into power after this event. So this proved vital for the win of the Russians. I mean, monarchists did still fight, but there was no leader that could, if they'd won the Civil War, there was no leader that could come back into power. There was no more monarch, except from the Tsar's brother, but he'd already turned that job offer down. So therefore, there was no real person that could take the Tsar's place and restore the monarch, the monarchy as it was. Now, after this, on August the 13th, the Battle of Savach occurs. I think I got that right. We hope. This is a massive victory for the Red Army. It pushed the Whites back even further. Then, on August 30th, there is an assassination attempt on Vladimir Lenin whilst he's trying to make a speech, or whilst he makes a public speech. He's shot once in the face and once in the arm or the shoulder, but he does eventually recover. However, this is the point where Lenin's health really starts declining, and although this isn't really covered or doesn't make too much of an impact on the Civil War, this is the part where Lenin goes into a massive deterioration, which eventually leads to Stalin taking power later on. But apart from now, Lenin is fine, he's recovered, but he never fully recovers from this point onwards. So that is something to keep in mind just for later. Then next, between September the 5th and September the 10th, there is a Battle of Kazan between, again, the Red and the White Army. And the Whites were allied with the Czech, so therefore, the Whites now had support from the country. However, the Red Army still takes a decisive victory. This is due to the fact that they, again, have a very, very strong army and a very capable army and had control of a lot of the factories. So their troops had a lot of equipment, ammunition, and they were a lot better than the White Army. They were a lot better equipped than the White Army was. Then, on the other side of things, after the Reds get a victory, there's bad news a month later on November the 11th, as World War I ends with the signing of the armistice. Now this means that the Whites can now get support from all the other allies because their hands are freed up. However, a lot of the allied countries like France, England, America, although they do help, however, they're very reluctant to help just due to the fact that, one, they're experiencing an economic recession just due to World War I and them having fought in World War I, but two, it's also not exactly something they particularly want to get involved. Of course they do because they want to stop the spread of communism, but they also are not sure whether it's their place to. But as I said, in the end, they do help support the Whites. So, in November 1918, Germans end up removing troops from the Russian soil. The Bolsheviks quickly enter and take places over the land. So, because of the signing of the armistice, it meant that Russia no longer had a claim to the land, and Bolsheviks quickly moved back in to reclaim the land that they lost in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which is a good thing. It makes them seem like a strong, powerful government because they've reclaimed what they lost during the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and it makes the treaty seem a lot better now. However, on December the 18th, the first big Allied intervention was when France enters in the Russian Civil War by sending troops into the city of Odessa, and they, of course, are allied with the Whites. This is where the shift in power could start being a thing, and the Whites do start winning some battles. So we're going to go on to now, in January of 1919, the troops from all the Allied nations, this also includes Japan, by the way. I didn't mention Japan, but Japan is one of the other key Allied nations. And they are more abundant after the end of World War I. They're now starting to be sent to Russia to fight with the Whites against the Bolsheviks or the Red Army. largely they're used in Siberia, and they're used on the eastern front, or the eastern city of Vladlis, Vladlis, uh, Vlad, Vladiskov, Vladiskov. That sounds right. This also includes Canadian forces and army generals, so they are given quite a large amount of support at this point. Then again, in March of 1919, US officials traveled to Moscow and they end up meeting with Bolshevik leaders, and the Bolsheviks offered them peace treaty propositions. Basically, this is the Bolshevik sense of, hey, I know you don't like us, but come accept us as a political party and give us our land and Russia, and we will, end the Civil War. And of course, the Americans politely declined. Now, on April the 8th, the Allied forces lose Odessa to the Red Army, which actually cuts off large proportions of the White Army. So not only was the organization really bad, but now parts of the army are completely cut off. And this starts to become a real problem, and they lose a lot of this land really quickly as a result of this. And then in June and August, the US and Britain start to withdraw their troops from the war as peace. People were demanding peace at home, and also the fact that it just wasn't going their way. And they'd send supplies, and a lot of them would end up in the Red Army's hands due to defectors and things like that from the White Army. So this was again the point where the Allies backing out and the Whites are really starting to lose now. Then in September 1919, the White Army tries to move into Ukraine, and then they try to move towards Moscow. They do get into Ukraine, however they are stopped quite quickly by the Red Army, so they are really unsuccessful. And this was a last gasp push sort of thing. At this point, the Russian Civil War is heading pretty much firmly in the hands of the Red Army. Then again, October the 13th, the White Army again has a desperate attempt to try and attack the Reds. This time they try to invade Petrograd and go through Romania. However, they end up retreating before any big advances. And this loss is really the point where the Whites have had it. And then through November to December in 1919, the White Army completely disbands as Bolsheviks keep pushing the Whites back on every single front, and they gain full governmental power, and there's nothing the Reds can do there's nothing the Whites can do about it. Then, in October of 1920, the Red Army signs a treaty of alliance with the Ukrainian Black Army, grouping together to take on the Whites. This is where the Reds get even stronger. And the Black Army, I'm pretty sure, is led by a group of peasants in Ukraine who sort of believe in the Bolsheviks' ideologies, but then also disagree at the same time. But they prefer the Red Army to the Whites, so they join the Reds and then again help them gain victories. Then in November the 7th to November the 15th, 1920, there is one final battle of Perekop between the Whites and the Reds. Blacks, sorry, that just came into my head because of the Ukrainian army. But the Whites versus the Blacks and the Reds, basically. And this was another decisive Red victory. And this, in essence, marked the end of the Civil War, with the victory going to the Bolsheviks and the Bolsheviks gaining complete power. Now that is the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you find this useful in any way, or at least informative. I've done as much research as I could find, watching YouTube videos, looking at websites, things like that to come up with this information. And then I've just done notes and decided to speak about it. So I hope you enjoyed. Bye.